So cars are basically a scam. That's what I've begun to realize. I think I began to realize it when I had my MX-5, which is, in my view, the best possible car. It's the best car I've ever owned, and I really liked it. I had the NC 2-litre version with the power retractable hard top, and my car was black. And it was just great. I enjoyed it so much. But I was only able to drive at certain times of the day and on certain days of the week, really. I had to choose the place where I could drive quite carefully. And I live in a very built-up area where everybody has a car and uses it all the time. Well, the road in which I live, I think I am the only resident out of about 17 or 18, or well, I suppose more because many are married. The only one really who ever walks on the road. I've seen one other man about my age who is without a car. He walks to the shops from time to time. But I'm the only person really that walks up and down every day. I've never seen any of my neighbours walk up the road. What's wrong with people? What's wrong with their legs? They just jump in the car and drive everywhere. And that's one of the reasons why cars are a scam, because they're on the road in their annoying cars with their often poor driving, and they're just blocking the roads and blocking the traffic. And now in the UK, or for a long time really, the police have been penalising motorists and trying to extract money from them, and doing it quite efficiently with deceptive speed camera traps, positioned really very often to earn the maximum revenue by fooling the motorist with a sudden reduction in the speed limit, unanticipated. It's quite a challenge to maintain sufficient attention on certain roads, on many roads in this country. So that's apart from the ridiculous tax imposed by the government. An RX-8, I think it's called, is a very nice car, the rotary engine Mazda, but the road tax on that one is about £750 every year that you just have to give to the government. Lord knows why. It's really wicked the way that the country is run. The level of predation upon the population is absolutely, well, it's just gone up and up and up over the years, and I think perhaps it's reached its zenith, or perhaps its zenith will be reached when we are all living as poultry in those of us that remain, because it seems that the current plan is to proceed as was openly announced on the Georgia Guidestones, to reduce the world population to 500 million. Is that a real thing? It's certainly been talked about. We've seen a certain these aggressive moves upon the population in many ways, many types of attack through the food, through the air quality, the water quality, and then through economic predation, so people are less able to heat their homes and so on and so forth. I don't know. I don't want to be alarmist about it. But I'm very unhappy about these 5G towers also. I don't know what they are doing of usefulness. I'm suspicious of them. They're very high power installations, and I have three surrounding my house, not immediately next to it, but at a distance. Presumably, I am covered by their network. Whereas in country areas or villages, they have none of those things, and perhaps the life is a bit healthier there. Some people might think, because they do emit radiation. Oh, whether it's harmful or not depends on what you read and who you listen to. But I don't think it's doing us any good, to be perfectly honest. And I would like to see them removed, but nobody asked me. It's like when people criticize the British. I think I've seen quite a lot of times an American supporter of gun ownership will say, you guys shouldn't have given up your guns. I'm sure you've seen that written, and they say it about the Australians as well. It's slightly different, I think, for America, because of course that was supposedly that was a frontier, and one had to be armed to defend oneself from potentially hostile Indian tribes, and just a general level of lawlessness, perhaps. I don't know what to believe about it all, and wild animals and all the rest of it, in a vast and extremely wild country with all sorts of dangers. Whereas somehow in Britain was, I think, is such a green and pleasant land. It doesn't have the perhaps the grandeur of North America, and it doesn't also have the dangers. We live in we have always lived in peace. Only latterly are we beginning to see, winds of war being deliberately manufactured, as they always are. But unfortunately, when I was growing up, Britain had been lulled into a sense, I think, of absolute mind control. Because remember, the television had started working. We'd watched the moon landing, and then people were watching these innocuous little soap operas that were slowly shaping and reshaping and building the society that they were intending to create by nudging opinion and perception. We lived really, I grew up in a kind of, what would you call it? Almost a sort of video game, as though we were just characters with certain expected, inevitable behaviors. I remember when I was a child, the police were viewed, well, with great seriousness. Oh, the police, we were shown Dixon of Dock Green, the absolute apogee of virtue and kindness, and yet the seriousness of the wrongdoers that had to be brought to justice, and who were they. And everybody was just watching these sorts of television shows and listening to manufactured news about supposed criminal events and all the rest of it. And people were becoming more and more affluent. And so gradually, people were starting to buy cars. Then we started to go on holiday, and then people started to travel abroad and so on. Well, perhaps not abroad at that time, but certainly to go to the seaside. To drive to the seaside became gradually more and more possible, and people really started to get into cars and enjoy them, and enjoy driving on this massive road network that had been that was being created. And I think they started building the motorways in about 1960. And they were very popular. Personally, I won't drive on a motorway if I can possibly avoid it. I've never really cared for them. I did have a period in my life when I was agoraphobic, and I couldn't drive on a motorway for a while. I found it so frightening. But fortunately, I recovered from that, and I can do it, but I don't care to do it if I can avoid it. I much prefer driving on ordinary roads. With limited traffic, you see, this is the problem with car ownership also. So, the other thing is, if you're going to drive anywhere of any note, there will come a time when you want to put your head down. Now, there are types of cars that you can sleep in, or vans, or whatever they're called, and caravans and whatnot, that you can sleep in. But the problem with them is that they're not the sorts of vehicles that you would really want to drive if you could avoid it. Not as a pleasurable activity. Not compared to an MX-5, put it that way, or your favourite sports car, whatever it's called. Or a Porsche. That'd be a good one, probably. A Porsche. A rear engine. The what's it called? The Toyota MR2 is more and more attractive to me, but I've just been hearing that it has engine problems. So that's definitely on the back burner if I ever do replace the car. But I've entitled the video that, cars are, I will entitle it, Cars Are a Scam. And, I am aware of that. Why have a car, really? Just for the pleasure of driving it. It used to be very closely associated with freedom, car ownership and freedom. And, I still feel that to a measure, but it's been greatly reduced because you're putting yourself into a control system, such a tight net by now, that your chances of incurring serious financial debt or whatever are just increase suddenly. And also maintenance costs, of course, because as costs rise and you can purchase an older vehicle, but you still have to take it to the mechanic or do it yourself if you're fortunate enough to have all the tools and the workshop space, and a minimum amount of knowledge and patience. Personally, I can't be bothered at all to work on a car. I never really grew up to it, and so I'd have to learn from the ground up. And I am a practical man. I think I could probably learn it, but I keep most of my activities to things like woodwork, just making things like that, and prefer not to get my hands oily or have to lie down on the floor and all that business. If I had a fully equipped workshop with a lift, yeah, I'd give it a go. Why not? But the thing is, you can do just as much damage as you can do good if you're not careful. Like the fellow who decides to just change the engine oil and ends up stripping the thread in the crankcase. How many times does that happen? A moment of foolishness or carelessness. So I prefer to leave that in the hands of people who know what they're doing. And there are plenty of good mechanics around, fortunately. Particularly MX-5 specialists, actually, you can find it in this area. So was it worth, getting into that scam again? A bit more social status, a sense of freedom. But really, you can take a train, you see, and then when you want to sleep, you need to go into a bed and breakfast or a hotel. where it's more comfortable and you can park the car outside. That's the best way to travel. But that raises another question, of course, because the journey, you're traveling alone. Um, you know, the car is using fuel. Maintenance costs are ticking over, and the journey then involves nights in a hotel also. So really, you could just take a bus to wherever you're thinking of going, or take a train, and then, or even walk if it's close enough, and then stay in a hotel. You just miss out the driving experience, but in terms of quality of life, I think it's probably superior. Um, Driving is a conceit, I suppose. That's the problem. It's a worldly conceit, like all sorts of things. I don't think worldly conceits are wrong, but you have to recognize them for what they are, I suppose, and then you can have a position of greater control and discrimination in relation to those things. And the last thing I'll mention, that word discrimination, we were forbidden almost from using it. It became so a sort of a synonym of racial discrimination, which was to be a terrible thing. And so to be discriminating seemed as though you were saying that somebody was doing something wrong, and many people started to think that's what it meant. It's a word that I've always used. Discrimination is essential for knowledge, for wisdom. We have to. That's the problem with the Masons. They can call themselves Christian all they want to, but they accept anyone who believes in a deity. Among that, you don't have to believe in Jesus Christ to become a Mason. You can believe in the adversary. That'll do. That's the problem. There's no discrimination. The only discrimination is against communists. You have to believe in a God. Communism is outlawed. But in a way, Christianity, true Christianity, has something of communism about it, because we no longer strive for property, and we share because universal love has become the law. And you could say that's a very utopic kind of communism in a way, you could say. When in the book of Acts, when the apostles were first set about their ministry, they had a moment of sharing of their goods and chattels, I seem to recall. It went by the board. I'm not advocating communism by any means. I hate the system. I'm very much in favor of individualism. But perhaps it's going to develop in something, once every man is a Christian and walking, in the spirit of Christ, they can no longer profit from us. That's the problem. We can no longer be their serfs because we haven't accepted or recognized their authority. They can't force a man beyond a certain measure, really. God bless this afternoon.